So that poses both a methodological question and also opens to the definition about a certain type of violence. The methodological question is the following, is that what seems to be the logic of these three cases is a logic that is based on cleansing. The idea is to push a population away, aside, at worst destroying it for good, but at least expelling it. So that's one element. And the other element is that it is triggered, at least the most intense phase is triggered by a certain form of insurgency, which means that people who deny that these are genocides will say two things. Will say, no, it was not a genocide, it was counterinsurgencies. And when you have counterinsurgency, well, bad things happen because it's a struggle, it's a war, on the one hand. And on the other hand, in the Genocide Convention, ethnic cleansing is not part of it. Lemkin apparently wanted to have it in, but finally in the convention it's not there. So you can say, even if you want to expel people, it's bad to expel people, but it cannot be called genocide. So one has to work with that, and working with that is, I think, what enables one in general to define a very specific type of violence, which is settler colonialism genocide, and that implies first finding the kind of regime of violence that is, which I think we can discuss, that is based on the notion that was in fact implemented and discovered first time around the genocide of the Nama and the Ovaherero, which is the notion of Lebensraum. So that's a certain type of regime, but also you have to show that this kind of violence falls into the category of genocide, and that means working on the text of the convention.
So we spoke about the special intent. Under the special intent, and given the special intent, there are several prohibited crimes. The most famous and the most effective of is a prohibition on killing the people, the prohibition on creating bodily harm, of preventing birth. And these are direct acts of violence. The perpetrator is close to or directly affects the victim of the genocide with the consequence of the act. But what has remained in the Genocide Convention and allows us to connect it in a clearest way to settler colonial genocide is the prohibition on inflicting on a group conditions of life calculated to bring about the destruction in whole or in part. And that term was really interesting for me and interesting for many people who were looking at what was happening in Gaza. Not that there was no killing and no bodily harm. There was plenty of that. We know about 50,000 Palestinians are recorded as dead and many more missing. There are bodily harm. There's upwards of close to 200,000 registered wounded, people we know are wounded. And I think everybody there has got a mental and physical crime, and prevention of birth without hospital is clear. But very explicitly to think through, what does it mean, conditions of life calculated to bring about a destruction? And for us, it meant that the act of killing is not direct, but is mediated through an environment, the conditions of life. Anyone that studied architecture, for my sins, I have, knows that the modern movement in architecture is completely obsessed with this term, conditions of life. The Bauhaus, Hannes Meyer, is speaking about, the architecture. The kind of conception is that, humans are kind of like a muscle without a shell, could not survive. The survivor, the architecture should provide the condition of life. The city should provide the condition of life. It's a kind of, if you like, a biopolitical apparatus that allow people to receive the medical aid, the food, through acts of distribution, the shelter, and so forth, the temperature that they need in order to survive and to multiply. And that is clearly that kind of biological obsession of modern architecture with condition of life. Is that so? For me, they're talking about architecture, no? The calculation of conditions of life mean that in that prohibition on genocide, the act is not on the body, the act is on the environment, which would transfer that act onto the body. So it's a kind of an indirect act of destruction. And in its indirectness, I would affect the city, the environment, the landscape, the forest, etc. And that the consequence of that would be your destruction. That we can start opening a big space and time between the act and its consequence that fits very much the duration of settler colonial violence, because we know that in settler colonialism, you're looking at the proportion of indigenous people who've been exterminated in North America, for example. The very minority of whom have died from direct violence. No, they're dying from the restriction of condition of life. They're no longer next to in the environment that could sustain them as people. So this is something that is incredibly important. And when you look at Gaza, you see that what has been destroyed are the conditions of life, the hospitals, all infrastructure that exists within let's say, the first meter under the surface, what we call the thick surface of a city, has been destroyed as the material, mechanical, let's say, infrastructure that buttresses life, not only biological, mosques and schools, as cultural life, and the soil itself with, for example, the salty water that Israel has put into the soil that are actually salinated, like in Carthage, that when you kind of make sure that nothing would be able to grow, you kind of poison the depth of the earth as the biological infrastructure of life that could evolve on top of it, calculated to bring about the destruction. It would bring about the destruction in a different duration. And then you ask the question, given the ceasefire that has been started to be put into effect, and we don't know if it's going to last, and all bet is it not, on the 17th of January, has the genocide ended? Right, act of killing, I don't know, Israel violated, but still, you could argue that direct killing have perhaps ended. The conditions of life have been designed, and we just today have read that, Trump has decided that his idea is to evacuate all Palestinians because, again, there is no conditions of life in Gaza, therefore expulsion. And the destruction of the environment is undertaken again in two ways. And this is where ethnic cleansing or forceful transfer sneaks back into the Genocide Convention. Because if you want to destroy people's ability to survive, you move them from their place. You move the Over Herero from the Windhoek Valley into the Asab. And you move the Ishil Maya from their mid-height on the mountain onto the valleys where they could not, or onto the top of the mountain where they don't have, what they need in order to survive. Or if they stay in place, it's like you pull the rug from under them. No? And that's an architectural act. So it's a human action on architecture, and architecture understood as a set of calculation in relation of life. And in a sense, this field of calculus was a mode of control, Israel mode of control of Gaza, that goes back decades, in a way that Israel restricted continuously water, restricted loans for industry, restricted the conditions of life in order to generate a place from which people would want to live.